Director Ray, we know from the Arizona case, the Supreme Court said that state, local law enforcement were not to enforce immigration laws. But isn't it true that local and state law enforcement officers can enforce state and local law if, even if the defendant is in the country illegally?
Well, I want to be a little bit careful since the last time I looked at that issue was back in the 2001, 2, 3 range when I was a lawyer at the Justice Department. But
look,
my recollection
time is very short.
It's
an easy question.
To yours. My recollection is similar to yours, but I'm not speaking as a lawyer right now.
Okay, it is the case, and I hope you'll refresh your recollection and your legal training. So it seems that since the federal government is welcoming, basically, by its tactics, by its handling of the massive surge across our border, in such a way to continue to encourage it, that there is massive destruction to landowners' property. It sounds like, understanding the criminal trespass laws of Texas, that perhaps landowners on the border ought to have no trespassing signs, including in Spanish, so that local law enforcement can protect the country while they're protecting the local property owners. There was a question about also the FISA court, and I'm still, as a former judge, particularly disturbed that no FISA judge felt strongly enough about people not lying in applications for warrants that they took action for contempt of court. But should DOJ officials that sign applications for warrants before the FISA court actually read them before they certify that they're true and correct?
Certainly, it's my practice when, as FBI director, I'm signing applications to...
You do read them?
I do review them, yes, absolutely.
And I would commend you for that, and I would ask you to look into...
They're not short, by the way.
Yeah, they're usually lengthy.
Yeah.
But I would commend your looking into Mr. Rosenstein's inability to testify that he actually read those regarding the Trump campaign before he signed them. The night before January 6th, January 5th, that evening I was talking to Capitol Police officers, and I said, you know, let's face it, most of the conservatives that come, they don't have any intention of being violent. And they said, well, we've been briefed today that there's a good bit of, it's understood, online activity, that there are people that are going to be coming that hate Trump, but they're going to dress up in red, MAGA, Trump paraphernalia to try to blend in and create trouble. We had Capitol Police Chief Son testify that they got no information from U.S. Intel or from the DOJ, FBI, of any threat of the nature that came about. Did the FBI have information about the violent threat that occurred on January 6th, on January 5th?
Well, the answer to that is complicated, unfortunately. So we've already talked about a little bit here this morning.
It shouldn't be complicated. You either had information or you didn't. That was my question.
So there's different kinds of information. We had the online chatter that we just talked about, and the so-called Norfolk SIR, Situational Information Report, has that. But what we did not have, to my knowledge...
Did you pass any of that information on to Chief Sund?
We passed the Norfolk information onto the Capitol Police in 3 different ways, as well as to...
Okay. Well, you were careful to note that most of the protesters who were leftists last summer were basically peaceful, but you haven't said that about the 100,000, 200,000 people that showed up on January 6th. Do you know how many people actually came into the Capitol on January 6th that were unauthorized?
I don't have an exact number. I do know that we've now are approaching around 500 arrests. But to be clear, to your point about peaceful, the way I think is a fair description of January 6th is there's sort of three groups of people, almost like an inverse pyramid. First group, biggest number of people who showed up kind of outside, maybe not on the Capitol grounds, were peaceful, maybe rowdy, but peaceful protesters. Then there's a second group that were people who, for whatever reason, engaged in, let's say, the next level of criminal conduct, trespass, et cetera. And that is criminal, that is a violation, and those laws need to be enforced. And then there's the third group, which is where you're seeing a lot of the arrests and a lot of the more significant charges that are coming out of our work right now, which are the people who brought all sorts of weapons, Kevlar, tactical vests, bear spray.
Firearms?
What's that?
Anybody bring firearms?
Gentlemen,
I can think of at least one instance where there was an individual with a gun inside the Capitol, but for the most part, the weapons were weapons other than firearms. But there's three groups, and it's hard to paint with one broad brush every single individual.
the gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Cohen.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Listen, have there been any FISA orders or warrants obtained to assist in the investigation of what happened to January 6th?
So I think you can appreciate, Congressman, I'm not in a position to talk about any matters that occur before the FISA court involving the implementation of the...
Well, the only way that we can have
classified.
oversight to discern whether or not that we should ever allow FISA to continue is if we find out what's been going on. And I was here beginning January of '05. We talked to lots of people from the Justice Department. We were assured nothing but foreign matters were going before the FISA court. So imagine the shock when we saw this order from the FISA court, which basically, well, not basically, it says that all call detail records created by Verizon for communication between the United States and abroad, there's the foreign, or wholly within the United States, including local telephone calls, all had to be turned over. And as I understand, there are still orders similar to that that have a big net, and once that information goes into the database of your department, of the DOJ, of the NSA, then there are thousands of people that can access that and have accessed that and done searches. So the question, when you have something that we're told is wholly domestic, that it's the domestic threat that's so serious, it is an important question to know whether you're using something called FISA, where the F stands for foreign, to go after American citizens. Because that, I can tell you, when I was here back in '06 and '08, we were taking these matters up. If people had known how badly that was being abused, there were people back then on both sides of the aisle who would have said, wait a minute, this is just being abused so much. So that's why it's a fair question to know in general, not specific cases, is the FISA court, has it been used to get orders to investigate January 6th?
So again, I'm not familiar with the order that you referred to a moment ago.
Well, it was leaked, I think it was WikiLeaks, and that's what was so shocking to so many of us. And look, the abuses occurred during the Bush administration, the Obama administration. There were some in the Trump administration, and I feel sure it's still going on. We need to know the extent of that. Well, let me ask you about a case in Kilgore, Texas. A lady there working for a private oil company got a text from her nephew. He had been looking through the FBI pictures and said, you recognize anybody in this picture? And it looks similar to her. And she did a LOL, you know, gee, that looks like me, don't turn me in. A couple of days later, 2 FBI agents show up at her place of business demanding to know where she was on January 6th. She was in Kilgore, Texas. And then they threatened her boss that he could go to prison for covering for her. Is there any order from any court that allows the DOJ or the NSA to monitor text messages of American citizens?
Obviously there are court orders, whether they come from federal courts, not the FISA court, or the federal FISA court, that authorize, pursuant to law, search warrants and surveillance.
Yes, but search warrants under the Fourth Amendment have to describe with particularity the things to be searched or seized, and that's not happening. That has not been happening. And so when you have no probable cause to go after somebody in Kilgore, Texas, then, you know, we'd heard about, oh, gee, there's software to look for specific words that allow you to go after anybody that hasn't committed crimes. We really need to know how widespread that is. Can you give us an answer? Is that being used?
It's just really important to point out, sir, that the way the law works is that the federal judge, a federal FISA court judge, will only approve an order based on probable cause that an individual is an agent of a foreign
Mr.
power.
Olson, we have proof
Gentleman's
that's a
time
lie.
has expired.
It has not
Mr.
been
Raskin is
followed,
recognized
and it
for
needs
5
to be.
minutes.
Has been interesting in recent days. I've been doing some research. And in fact, one of the things I was looking at is the average income over the last couple of decades, going back to 1991. And it appears, looking, and this was average annual wage according to the Social Security Administration. So maybe somebody take issue with their accuracy, but according to their numbers, during the Clinton years, during the Clinton administration, the average household or average American, working American income went up each year about $1,000 a year. So over President Clinton's 8 years in office, average income went up about $8,000 over those 8 years. Under President Bush, it was a little more than $1,000 a year during his 8 years, but during the Obama administration, it was not quite, I think it was between $7,000 and $8,000 increase per year during the Obama administration. And then during the 4 years of the Trump administration, the average income went up about $2,000, between $7,000 and $8,000 for the 4 years. Dramatic increase. But I was shocked as I was looking at different numbers to find that the net worth for black households in America during the 8 years of the Obama administration went down by 30% on average. During the Trump administration, it didn't go down, it went up significantly. So as I look at what is being proposed in the Build Back Better program, and I see this administration having canceled the Keystone XL pipeline, which certainly was going to and has caused an escalation in fuel prices and energy prices. And of course, President Biden released the penalties that had been put on the Russian natural gas pipeline. So it's doing great now. And took off some of the penalties on Iran. Anyway, we've seen energy prices go up substantially. And the price of energy going up significantly. And it brought back to mind yet again Honorable John Dingell's comment. He was looking forward to pushing through, in essence, a socialized medicine program through the committee he was chair of in 2009, 2010. But he was famously asked about the cap and trade bill, and he responded that the cap and trade bill is not only a tax, it's a great big tax. And he's explained before that when you raise the price of energy, you're not hurting the billionaires, the mega wealthy. That's an inconvenience to them when you raise the price of energy, be it electricity, be it propane, natural gas, coal, whatever it is. It's an inconvenience to the very wealthy. But to those that are on fixed income, those that are scraping by, working so hard every week and just getting by, you increase the price of gasoline, the price of electricity, energy, and you just devastate those households. It's not just a little tax to them, it is devastating. And the inflation that comes with exploding upwards the price of fuel and of energy, but especially fuel, as this administration has done, it inflates the price of everything. There's just not much of anything unless you're buying from some pickup truck or some roadside kiosk. Otherwise, you're having to pay a lot of extra energy costs, whether it was for the ingredients of something you're buying or whether it's the product getting to market. But usually it's all of the above. The energy prices inflate costs of everything, basically. And that's what's happened to the working poor in America. That's what's happened to seniors on fixed income. They are being devastated as prices continue to skyrocket with no end in sight. And on a trip some years back during the Obama administration, some of us went to Germany and we met with some of their energy leaders. And in one meeting, the driver of our little van, he was from Berlin, and he sat in and listened, and I was talking to him privately after the meeting, and he said, I hear all these rich people talking about how great our green energy is in Germany, but I've had to go from having one job to having 3 jobs, hardly ever getting to see my family, so they could brag about our green energy, but it is destroying my family. It's completely destroyed my family time. I am having to work these 2 other jobs just to cover our energy costs. So it's kind of hard listening to them brag about it when it's coming out of my hide. I'm the one, and people just like me all over Germany are the ones that are paying for them to be able to brag about our green energy, because it's costing us a tremendous amount in the way of personal time, family time, and additional time working to pay for their bragging. And as we look at these issues and the costs skyrocketing in America, who's benefited? Well, China has benefited dramatically. We know they're still on course to have 100 new coal-powered energy plants go online over the next couple of years. They don't care that they're produced. Of course, when we have coal-powered plants here in the U.S., not many left, but when we have them, they've got scrubbers in there that are taking pollutants out of the air before it ever gets out the stacks to the air. So if we're doing the coal burning here in the U.S., it's not so hard on our environment as it is in China or India, but especially China. Because when people are just struggling to survive and to have enough money to put food on the table for their families, they're not that worried about how their yard looks or how things look, how the environment is. And the same is true not only for an individual, but for a country. If the economy is struggling, the people in that country are not as interested in cleaning up the environment. We'll have to wait, they think, until we're making decent money, and then we can worry about the environment. Here in the United States, though, if you go back to 2007, every year since then, including through the Trump years, we have been producing 1.3% less carbon dioxide, and we can debate about what that does to the environment, whether it makes the temperature warmer. I've read where experts have said if you got a choice between the temperature getting slightly warmer or slightly colder, you want warmer, because if it's getting slightly colder, that means there's less time for crops to grow. If it's slightly warmer, not too much warmer, then you got more time for crops to grow, you got more food, and you have fewer people starving. So there's a lot of areas for debate, but for those that are concerned about carbon dioxide emissions, we've been on the right track, and we continue to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide we're putting out in this country. And so there's nothing about building back better. I mean, this has been going on for a long time. And largely that is, we're told that's due, experts say that's because we have been converting coal plants to natural gas, and natural gas is such a clean burning fuel. For those that want to get rid of all fossil fuels, if they would just take a serious look at all of the things in the room in which they're located, or the car in which they're located, they will find that so much of what we have and that has made our lives easier, helping people rest better, are a result of the use of fossil fuel. There's so many products that cannot be manufactured without natural gas as part of the manufacturing process. You've got to have natural gas to make so many products. I was looking at getting some plastic composite boards so they wouldn't deteriorate so often for part of the area in our backyard. And they're expensive, but when they last for decades instead of a matter of short years, it looks like a good thing. But that's using recycled plastic, finding more and more uses for that. Plastic, fiberglass, there's so many things we can't produce. Synthetic fibers, so much of the carpets and rugs we have, synthetic. The toothbrush, you wouldn't have a modern day toothbrush. And I realize that, yes, there are people that have used bark off certain trees to brush their teeth. I get that, but I kind of like having a modern day toothbrush myself. You wouldn't have that without fossil fuel, particularly natural gas. People say we need more electric cars. We need to get rid of fossil fuel. You cannot manufacture currently an electric car without the use of fossil fuel. Even if you don't use fossil fuel to power the vehicle, you're going to have to use it in the production of things within the car, or there will be no car. So I don't know, maybe somebody will build a wooden car, but wooden batteries are not going to work. So for those of us that recognize how the length of life has gotten even longer during our modern history, medicine advances have been just extraordinary. There's a great book, The 5,000-Year Leap, that points out that when settlers came to America, they used basically the same type of farming methodology and tools that have been used for thousands of years. Hadn't been a whole lot of change. But if you look at the last 150 years in the United States and in Western civilization, you see dramatic increases and advances in the way that we have progressed, whether it's farming, medicine. Heck, if you go back 100 years or so, when medical historians say that in the early 1900s, up to that point, for the whole of human history, you had a better chance of getting sicker after seeing a doctor than you did of getting better. And then you look at since 1910, 1920, some say it might be the 1918 protocols during that pandemic, but around that time, you started having a better chance of getting better after seeing a doctor. And look at where we are now. People go to the doctor and expect to be made well because we've been able, by the grace of God, to develop so many different cures, and life has gotten longer, life has gotten better quality. And so much of what we have is made by the use of fossil fuels. We need to do it cleanly, as cleanly as possible. But again, when you take an economy in the direction that the Build Back Better Biden administration has been doing, as we head to the toilet with this economy, and there's no end in sight for this race to the bottom, then you realize we've come so far and now we're going the wrong direction. There have been times like World War II when we were struggling mightily, but we're not going through a world war right now. We should be doing well. And we saw during the Trump administration, for the first time in decades, something had happened that people, even in 1990, when I brought a friend to speak to our Rotary Club, he had said, we're going the wrong direction. We're becoming more and more reliant on foreign countries for our energy. It's been years, he said, since we've been energy independent, and we're going the wrong way, and it's going to destroy this country if we can't produce the energy we need. 30 years later, not even 30 years later. We were energy independent, the biggest producer of fossil fuels in the world. And we used it cleaner than anybody else, virtually almost any other country. Maybe some small ones do a little better. But China knows that they're not going to be breathing their own air. It turns with the planet, and we end up breathing as much as they do right here in America. Not the clean air we produce more of every year for many years, but the polluted air that China's letting off as they continue to move toward putting us in their wake as they move toward becoming the greatest economy in the world. And spending money, massive amounts of money we don't have, creates not only inflation, but it weakens this country. I've heard some in recent days say, if we're not careful, we're going to end up like Greece. And actually, if you look at the debt we had at the end of the Obama administration, we were already Greece. The difference is we got to produce our own currency. Greece was using the euro, so they didn't get to decide to create a lot more money in their system. And the dollar was the world standard. It was the world currency. And I know there are countries, including China, that are advocating against the dollar being the world currency, and that's used to buy oil in the world market, but that hasn't happened. And I'm very thankful for that. But if we were not the world currency and we didn't produce our own money, then we would already be in as big a trouble as Greece is because of the recklessness. And we're seeing it like never before in this administration. Yes, it's true, the Obama administration, they hit, with the Democrats helping them, they hit between $1.5 and $1.6 trillion deficit in 1 year. Well, this administration, this Democrat majority, are working very hard to eclipse that by a lot. We were warned back when we had over $1 trillion deficit more than 1 year that, the agencies that rate countries' economies and their currency and their debt, they may have to downgrade our debt. Standard & Poor's did that because we wouldn't get our spending under control. Not enough. If any other rating agency had downgraded our debt, then the cost of borrowing money would have gone up dramatically, and we would have ended up spending more paying interest than we were taking care of seniors who were counting on their fixed income. So there's some dark days ahead if we continue on this course of spending money we don't have. And it's like everything this administration can see to throw money at that might help create more Democrat Party voters, they're throwing money at it. So people were shocked, including Democrat friends, who were shocked to hear that this administration is proposing paying $450,000 to a legal immigrant that was separated from a child. Well, we know that that did happen some during the Trump years. We know that it happened, it's continued to happen during the Biden years, that it happened under the Obama administration, and it can be a good idea until we're sure that an adult with a child that's already breaking our laws by coming in illegally is actually related to and hopefully the parent of that child, instead of part of the drug cartels that are going to continue to use them in sex trafficking. And we have had people that turned out not to be related to the child they were claiming, and we've been able to interrupt that. And so it is important that we don't just take this at face value, especially when we have reports of children being recycled to come across with people over our border illegally. So under the Biden administration, they're thinking, okay, these people come in, they break U.S. law, we're going to give each one $450,000. And that may not mean much to somebody who has a son that sold paintings for $500,000. And I wouldn't object if the Biden administration wanted to give each illegal immigrant a painting that Hunter Biden had done. Say, here's your $500,000. Here's another painting that Hunter Biden has done. Enjoy it. Maybe you can sell it for $500,000 and you'll be set for life. Let's try that. But $450,000. You look at the Social Security Administration, the wages. Well, for 2020, the most recent numbers we have, the average income for an American last year was $53,000, like $53,300, something like that. But $53,000 a year. Now, the rate is normally around 22%. There's data that indicates the effective rate paid for income tax may be around 13, 14%. But let's just round it and say that the average American making $53,000 a year pays 20% income tax. That would be $10,600 a year that the person making $53,000 would pay in federal income tax. And if you took all $10,600 of federal income tax coming from the average wage earner at $53,000 a year, you took that $10,600 and applied that toward the $450,000 President Biden wants to give to each of these illegal immigrants, it would take 42 and a half years of the average American wage federal income tax to pay one person who broke the U.S. laws and came into the country illegally. And that is what appears to be justice to the Biden administration. And how is our president looking to the rest of the world? Story today, as he came into the G20 summit, he came in, according to the article I saw, 20 minutes late and said, sorry, in essence, sorry to be late, but he had been trying to get past the elevators. They had a problem with the elevators, and that's why he was 20 minutes late. Somebody needs to help him. I think it would be helpful not to leave people from the biggest countries, except for China and Russia. They didn't come. Their leader didn't come. But the rest, let's show them a little more respect by not making them wait 20 minutes for our president to show up. I think that would be a good thing, kind of lend a better atmosphere to those type meetings. And perhaps then you wouldn't have foreign reporters saying things like one said, President Biden looks like he needs a nursing home and a hot bowl of soup. We need to help our president give a better image of America. And I know there's no intention for our president causing problems like that, none whatsoever. So I'm avoiding engaging in personalities. But I think it would be good. There's so many people helping the president to help him represent our country well. So an article here, $450,000 payment to illegal aliens would exceed various programs for American citizens. And of course, we in Congress did a good thing in recent years. We felt like the families of those people who have lost a loved one in combat, they should have been getting more than the measly thousands of dollars they were. So we increased the amount that the family of an American hero who was killed in combat would get, was increased to $400,000. Well, we find out the Biden administration wants to provide more than we provide to the family who's lost a loved one in combat, representing and defending our country, our national interests. Someone who crossed the border illegally, according to this administration, should get an extra $50,000 more than those who died for this country. We also know, and I'm pleased that Secretary Buttigieg is back from paternity leave, because we do have a real crisis in our supply chain. Didn't have this problem during the Trump administration. And it sure seemed to be a good idea, the way we were manufacturing more of the things we need in America. I'm not a big fan of tariffs, but as I told President Trump, since you are simply using them as a tool to get better trade deals, then I will vote for those tariffs for such use so that we can get more fairness in our agreements with foreign countries. And that worked out. And President Trump did make some good deals. But we're seeing all that fall aside as this administration seems to be more dedicated to helping China, Russia, Iran, OPEC nations do better with their economy than we are here at home. And I realize there's some people here in Washington that feel like America has more than it deserves. And I believe God has blessed us more than we deserve in America. But we're seeing those things change as we've continued to forget more and more just who the source is for the blessings in this country. In fact, what occurred to me is instead of build back better, as we see the economy in shambles, prices going through the roof, more and more people now being fired, the economy appears headed in even deeper trouble the further we go, that maybe instead of build back better, we could call it Biden's bulldozings of our blessings. But here's an article from Fortune. No sign of relief. The global supply chain crisis could last well into February. And you know, as I thought back, Vice President Harris, seems like it was back in August, was speaking to some folks, and somebody made fun of her for saying you may want to order your Christmas presents early this year so you make sure you have them. And I didn't know why anybody would make fun of it, because it turns out She was actually exactly right. Apparently, she knew back in August we were going to have trouble getting the things we need in America. I've been amazed to see car lots more empty than they have cars. Shocking. I've never seen some of these car lots with so few cars ever in my life. It's an article from The Hill. More people in Manchin Sinema's home states want to hold off on new spending. That's from Polls, article by Michael Snell from The Hill. So people have been trying to convince Senator Manchin, Senator Sinema, they just need to sign off on spending trillions more dollars. But recent polls apparently are showing that people in their home states appreciate them not agreeing to more and more of the runaway spending that would just increase inflation. So, and one other thing people are noticing, Washington Times story from Stephen Denon, Biden administration expands no-go zones where ICE cannot arrest illegal immigrants. So millions more coming in and fewer being deported. And, Mr. Speaker, I think it's important for people to understand this feeling that we need to secure our borders doesn't come from any kind of xenophobia. I look at the Hispanic culture, and though generalizing can be dangerous, generally speaking, I see a faith in God, I see a hard work ethic, I see a devotion to family. Well, those are things that I believe made America the great country it's been. We need more of that help. And you look at the contributions that immigrants have made from countries all over the world to this country to make it as powerful and as great as it is. Yeah, we want immigration. No country in the world, even those bigger than the United States, no country is as generous with providing visas as the United States is, over 1 million a year. But we need to be able, as Milton Friedman pointed out, if we're going to provide welfare in this country, which started back in the 60s, then we can't have open borders or this country will be over very soon. It will be overwhelmed with people coming in. It will destroy the golden goose that some look at the U.S. as being, and there won't be any country to flee to looking for a better life. Some in allied countries tell me if you lose your freedom in America, there won't be any freedom in the world. We'll all lose our freedom pretty quickly if you lose yours. This is critical stuff. But I think the biggest danger of people swarming across our border, as they've been doing this year, unimpeded, is the danger that Benjamin Franklin pointed out. He didn't go into detail, but as most people here remember, he was asked by a lady as he left the Constitutional Convention at the conclusion, "What have you given us?" And as most everybody here knows, he replied, "A republic, madam, if you can keep it." A republic. A Republican form of government. That's with a little r, not Republican Party, but a republic. That's what the Roman Empire, what the Romans came up with after they looked at democracy from the Greeks. They actually had a real democracy where most everybody participated in the big decisions. Fortunately, they realized you can't let everybody vote as a juror in law cases, So they restricted those law cases juries to only having 501 people. As I understand it, it was 501 people on the jury that voted to make Socrates drink poison as his penalty. And that's what you see when you have too many participating in a process. It gets out of hand. You get a handful and they start running and they get people fired up. Before you know it, one of the finest men in the country is ordered to drink poison. You have to be careful, and that's what the Romans realized. So they created a republic. We like the democratic idea that people get to vote and participate in government, but let's have them elect representatives, and then the representatives study the issues and they vote on behalf of the rest of the country. And if we don't like how they're voting, we throw them out in the next election and select another representative. That's the Republican form of government. And republics generally have not lasted more than 200 years. So we're 30 years or so past the 1789 ratification of our Constitution. Some would say, well, when we passed 200 years, we're living on borrowed time. But we know history. Not enough. Too many of our schools quit teaching history because the federal government got involved in education. Is education an enumerated power under the Constitution for the federal government to be involved in? No, it's not. But in 1979, President Carter created the Department of Education, and as a result, the percentage of teachers in education has dropped dramatically. Is nearly 3/4 of the teachers in, 3/4 of the employees in K through 12 education in Texas, nearly 3/4 were teachers. But then after the Department of Education comes along, you got more bureaucrats here making more requirements for the folks in Austin and every state capital. And so those folks have to hire more people to answer the mandates of the Department of Education in Washington. And to get their information, they have to mandate more people in every school board in elementary school. I had a fantastic public school education, elementary school, middle school, high school. But elementary school, we had a principal. Principal had an assistant. And then there was the janitor. Then there was the people that worked in the cafeteria, and that was it. Now, every school has to have so many people gathering information, working in the administration to send to the state capital so they can send to Washington. And as I recall, it's either the late 80s or the early 90s. I think it was the early 90s. But I was on the board of former students at Texas A&M, and I was asking the president, and he had some other people there that worked on analyzing SAT scores. And I said, I understand that the SAT test has now been recalibrated so that students will make better than they have in the past for answering the same number of questions right. And yeah, it's been recalibrated. People were embarrassed that SAT scores were a lot lower now than they used to be. So you took SAT in the early 70s. Your score now would probably be around 200 points higher than it was back then. I was intrigued by that. Why did we have to recalibrate the SAT? Well, it was so people wouldn't think schools were failing during the 90s. So SAT scores came back up, not because they were doing better, but because the scoring was recalibrated. So that was a rather interesting illumination on education. But we've continued to see problems. And as both Republican and Democrat presidents been pushing more control. And President Trump tried to get more control back locally, but what has happened is the federal government has taken more and more control right here in Congress. You know, we continue to pass stuff that says you don't get your money back. Of course, we know the money comes from the states up here, but we're not going to give you your money back unless you do this, that, or the other, like we tell you. Well, one of the mandates has been you had to pass this federally mandated test. And the federally mandated test was extremely light on history. I'm told that there are times when there isn't any history, maybe one history question. And it's not always good history if a question's asked. So I hear from schools back home, we have to teach to the mandated test, because if any student doesn't pass the federally mandated test, we don't get all that federal money that came from us back to us. They keep it for that student. So to avoid not getting back even as much of our own money as we should, we've got to get people prepared to pass the test. So some schools, they get rid of music, they get rid of art, and some of us are big advocates who go, wait a minute, do you not understand that when it comes to music, comes to art, you're getting synapses to fire in the brain that may not fire otherwise, and if you can get more synapses firing, then the student's brain can accumulate more, work better, and then overall do better scoring. Look, we got to get them to pass the test, I'm told. And those things, music, art, not on the test, so we got to concentrate on making sure the students are ready for that federally mandated test. Well, that's a shame. Music and art add dramatically to life. And there's some awesome art teachers. They didn't do too well with me. Apparently there's art gene in my background. My dad was artistic. Got a daughter, very artistic, but it was a latent gene in me. But I see what it adds. And the art contests that all of the representatives, I think most of us have in our districts, you see the incredible products that these kids are able to create. And it's really inspiring. And yet so many are having to cut back or get rid of art altogether. Why? Because of the federal mandates from here on high on Mount Olympus and Capitol Hill. It is important also on how we treat people. When I go to the border, I don't mistreat anybody that comes in illegally. Try to help how I can, but they've come into the country illegally. And we need to get back to the Trump policies before we get overwhelmed. And going back to the point that Benjamin Franklin made, it takes work to keep a republic. It doesn't just happen. That's why it has happened so rarely. That's why the United States of America is such an anomaly in history. Never been a country like this. Even Solomon's Israel didn't have all of the individual opportunities, all the individual assets and comforts that we have here in America. It's an amazing place, but it takes work. It takes education of our children, training them up so they understand what it takes to preserve a republic, a representative form of government, and getting stronger and stronger as we have done till more recent years. And when you have people flooding in, I mean, if we 2 million people this year. This administration has 3 more years. So are we going to have 8 million, at least 8 million more people enter this country illegally? They're not coming from countries that understand how to preserve a republic. I'll tell you, some of the very best citizens we have in this whole country are people who went through the process of becoming legal citizens. And I hear from them a lot in my district. And they love America because they know how it can be outside of America. And they don't want our country becoming like those countries they came from. People from Venezuela, people from Central America, from Eastern Bloc countries, some of the best citizens we've got, from Russia. You know, my cousin married a Russian, and she knows. We were talking about it last week, and she's feeling a sense of urgency. We're losing what we're having, what we've had. We're becoming more like the place I was so anxious to leave. It takes work to keep a republic and to enjoy the blessings we've received. And people that are flooding in, they've never been trained on what it takes to preserve a republic. And they're one of the big issues to so many people during the COVID pandemic has been the unprecedented grab of power that the federal government has never had before. Never. We've had pandemics that were a lot more deadly than COVID, but no one has ever had the nerve to tell people who were not infected, who had thriving businesses, that they had to close down their business. We're going to let these people open. We're not letting you open. 30 years ago, they would have opened anyway, probably 20 years ago. And they would have won in court without question. You can't shut down business. It's unprecedented. And for heaven's sake, to tell the churches they couldn't open for the huge majority of our history, when there was a time of emergency, including a pandemic, people felt like they needed to be in church praying, that they needed to be asking God for help. And for the first time in our history, we didn't have a president that issued a national day of prayer and fasting, asking God to help us. First time in our history, we had a national proclamation: you got to close businesses. You got to close churches. You can't meet. Some places, state said you can't even sing in church because you open your mouth. We can't allow that. And I know there's still a lot of mixed signals on masks. It's interesting, those cloth masks that I had a mask getting on a plane with, one of the Shima 97, designed in Israel, have 4 layers of cloth that are ionized, that help kill germs. They don't just catch them, help kill germs. The flight attendant says, but I can see your nose, so that mask can't be any good. It can't be any good, she says. And she's wearing one of the little blue and white masks. Talk about not doing any good. Although, in fairness, I've read that there's some studies that say those little blue and white masks can decrease your percentage of getting COVID by 0.2%. So 0.2%, if that's what it is, great. Wear one of those little cloth masks. But then we see down in Florida, that's been most open, that they have fewer cases percentage-wise, they're doing better than any other state in the country, and they've been the most open state we've had. So it's interesting, and I have an article here from Gateway Pundit. It wasn't just beagles and monkeys. Fauci's NIH also funded medical experiments on AIDS orphans in New York City. I'd read somewhere else that these were black orphans that had AIDS, and the Fauci NIH was doing experiments on them, according to this article from Jim Hoff. They reported that 25 children of those black orphan AIDS babies died during the drug studies they were doing on those poor little babies. An additional 55 children died following the studies while they were in foster care. Tim Ross, director of the Child Welfare Program at VERA, looking for what that stands for, the Vera Institute, that as of 2009, 29% of the remaining 417 children who were used in drug studies had died. 532 children that had been admitted to have been used now. That was in the last 20 years. I don't know if Dr. Fauci has asked if he knew about that. We found out he lied about funding gain of function in China. But another article from Fox Business, Elizabeth Faddis, that Dr. Fauci is demanding or facing a demand from lawmakers on both sides of the aisle to divulge information regarding the alleged use of experimental drug on puppies. Well, I can guarantee you, as more people find out that NIH was using orphan black AIDS babies for drug experiments that killed many of them, there will be even more cries from both sides of the aisle on answers. I mean, I thought we were so far past anything like that. I mean, after the outrageous Tuskegee experiments, I can't believe we've been doing that same stuff in the last 20 years. Somebody needs to be held account for these things. Well, we're in deeply troubling times, and there is a good chance that if we don't get back to making sure children in America know how to sustain a republic, we're headed for losing it. And it's a fear of that, fear of the loss of freedom, caused me to leave the bench and run to try to get elected to Congress so I could make a difference in legislation, so we could try to salvage this little experiment in self-government. But it seems pretty clear it's not going to last much longer. You can't absorb 8 million people who not only, most of them don't speak the language, but are adults who have no clue, never been educated. They've certainly got the capacity to learn, but they've never been educated what it takes to preserve self-government and the blessings that we have in this country. And if they're not educated to that, if they're simply handed $450,000 each, then that's all they know. Wow, this is a country where you come in, demand money, they give it to you. You can't sustain the country like that, and we won't. No one ever has. Rome Heck, there was one Caesar that figured out that bread and circuses are being given to keep people peaceable